Thanks for joining WECC this morning and for the first part of this week, and also for those of you that will be attending with the Western Interconnection Compliance Forum. We've partnered together, and we look forward to putting together a couple of great days for all of you in attendance for those. So my name is Steve Noss. I'm the VP of Reliability and Security Oversight at WECC. And so in that role, I oversee the compliance monitoring and enforcement function, along with registration and certification. And we've got a big team here this week. They're looking forward to presenting, facilitating presentations, and also meeting with folks. So we'll talk about that in a minute. So we're excited. We're doing something a little bit different. We've had these workshops off and on, spring, fall, sometimes once a year for several different years. And one thing that we've tried to do starting this year is to separate the focus of our workshops. So for the spring workshop, this workshop, we intend to try to be more program focused, try to cover things that are related to folks that might be new to compliance roles, folks that are seasoned but have direct interaction or oversight of compliance roles related to NERC reliability standards. And then in the fall, we're going to transition to try to make the workshops a little bit more technical, almost focused exclusively on more technical information directly related to the reliability standards, something for which you could link in with different SMEs that you have at your organizations and try to have them connect with specific standards topics that we'll be putting on in the fall. And because of that, I think, part of the reason we've been doing this and developing this focus is that we've seen that there's really a broad variety of participants. And so I am just curious if you can humor me, just so we can kind of see the broad diversity of experience with this space, specifically reliability standards, compliance. How many of you would say you've been associated in the space for like, let's say more than 10 years? Okay. Pretty good number. How about like in the middle there, 2 to 10 years? Who's got some experience, maybe not more than 10. Okay, another good. How about less than 2 years? All right. Well, great. So it's a very good mix. As you can see, you look around, see your neighbors, and that's exactly what we're hoping to find a sweet spot for. This is to make something relevant for all of you that are here in attendance for that. One thing that we'll be doing a little bit, well, let me get through the antitrust policy. All WECC meetings are conducted in accordance with WECC antitrust policy and the antitrust compliance guidelines. We need to all comply with this, so if there's any questions about that, raise those and we'll address that with our general counsel. This is also a public meeting. We're being recorded. We're broadcasting live to attendees who are following us on the web. So just bear in mind that it's a public meeting and this is considered an open session. We're going to be recording and posting this afterwards, and we just want to make sure that you give your consent while participating. So as you read this and you have any questions, let us know. And finally, let me, but most importantly, introduce our keynote speaker today. I'm really excited to have Ben Miller here. Ben is the CISO at the industrial cybersecurity company Dragos. He leads a team centered on safeguarding Dragos there, and he spent the previous 6 years as the VP of Services, where he led analysts responding to OT and ICS intrusions, delivery of assessments, hunts, training, and research efforts to improve OT ICS defenses and security. He's an information security veteran. He has over 2 decades of experience focused on the unique challenges of securing and defending industrial control systems. He started at Constellation Energy, so with a utility in the East. He was responsible there for detecting and responding to threats across Fortune 150 enterprise, where he acquainted with security challenges for transmission, generation, and nuclear assets. He then joined NERC, the North American Electric Reliability Corporation, and he was in what would soon become the EISAC, the Electricity Information Sharing and Analysis Center. So he has some experience there, and then he worked very closely with our federal and industry partners to assess threats, vulnerabilities, and other matters as part of the EISAC as it relates to the North American bulk electric system. He's an accomplished speaker at conferences around the world, and he does occasionally write for various publications. We thought it'd be appropriate in light of recent and rising cyber threats in the electricity sector. His session today is going to emphasize the importance of robust logging and detection within NERC Critical Infrastructure Protection, drawing on his 2021 testimony before FERC advocating for better cybersecurity measures. He will also cover current threats like VOLTZITE, Typhoon, and outline proactive steps organizations should take to prepare. You should all get some actionable insights on aligning your security strategies with compliance requirements. And it's all in support of trying to enhance your posture in this really dynamic environment that we're all in. Dragos is a company that is committed to protecting against threats to industrial infrastructure. They deliver cybersecurity technology. They ensure visibility into ICS OT assets, vulnerabilities, and response strategies. And we're just really happy to have Ben here to share his insights with us. So I hope you can join me in welcoming Ben. And Ben, welcome to the WECC conference. Thank you.
Awesome. Thanks, Steve. Hi, everyone. Thanks to WECC for having me here. Super appreciate it. One of the very first times I was in a classified environment, we were talking and chit-chatting, waiting for everyone to show up. And one of my government partner colleagues blurted out, "Somebody needs to solve this cyber stuff." We haven't solved it yet, but let's talk about how we can move the needle. So as mentioned in the opening, I testified in front of the FERC commissioners in 2021 at a technical conference where I suggested we need to do a lot more than SIP 007 R4 as it relates to actually detecting and monitoring our environments. This presentation is largely some background on some of the things I've seen over the last 15 or so years that informed that decision. The first event is in 2009 when the FBI contacted me. Said, "Hey, we have this information about your network environment. These diagrams, these IP addresses. They were found on a attack server owned by Chinese adversaries, our advanced persistent type of threat." Like, oh. So what we identified a week earlier when that activity happened, we did have a detection on our system for a generic Trojan. The analyst at that time detected that threat. It was on a, I was going to say laptop, it was on a workstation. Back then we had workstations. And the analyst saw that flag, wiped the machine, went back across his day. What he didn't do the analysis of was what did that Trojan actually do? And that was the tip-off that the FBI gave us. It was like, hey, something bad happened, and it was isolated at that time frame. So unfortunately, we wiped the machine, so we didn't have that forensic evidence that actually detailed what was going on. But we had a plethora of other data sources, largely network monitoring systems that had full packet capture, it had flow data, it had transactional data as far as HTTP, DNS, FTP, and a range of others. And that knowledge, that history, that logging allowed us to identify exactly what was going on with that threat. We were able to sequentially walk through by the second the activity of the download, the queries that were made, the reconnaissance that were performed using off-the-shelf, really just native tools, netuse and other commands that are based in Windows to extract that information and then finally send it out. That is the power of network security monitoring. This was deployed within our corporate enterprise environment at the time. And then I kind of got sidetracked with NERC CIP. So about a year, this was the very first implementation for us. It was version 2 is what went into effect in a long time ago. So we went from nothing to defining an ESP, which by itself was like a 9-month process of conversations after conversations, creating the DMZ and all the controls that were therein. And then we were We were audibly compliant. I think it was January of 2009 or 2010. I don't quite remember. We went audibly compliant. And that fall time frame, I started the conversation. So now that we have all these monitoring controls in corporate, we need to focus it on the crown jewels, the system that actually makes us money, so that we can get ahead of this from an attack perspective, right? Our corporate environment should be less secure than our most critical assets, right? Well, it didn't quite work out, right? We were focused on maintaining the compliance regime that we had. We didn't have the resources to dedicate towards unraveling the system that we created in order to deploy these heightened controls that were beyond the norm at the time. So that was disappointing. I worked as an asset owner a couple more years, but I don't like being told no. So fight the system by joining the system. So I joined NERC 2011, 2012 timeframe. And it was I was not responsible for any regulatory aspect, quite frankly. I was focused on that glue part of working with government partners, industry, on trying to move the needle and solve things that were outside of necessarily NERC SIP specifically. And the one area that we had influence that was beyond NERC SIP was defined in the rules of procedure, which all registered entities sign. And I remember specifically how important it was. I said it all the time. It was NERC rules of procedure, section 810, which granted NERC the authority to do advisories and issue guidance, as well as receive guidance back. So starting around that time frame, essentially while I was at Dragos, I apologize, I was the primary author for most of the NERC alerts that were issued from 2011, 2016 timeframe. But it was the one mechanism that we had to engage the industry on more than just what was behind the ESP. One of those advisories I had written about that was in, I think it was a level 1 NERC alert, was the Chinese gas pipeline intrusion set from 2011. This is an interesting intrusion set. It's, CISA actually revised it in 2021. The serial number is there, AA21201A. This rolls off the tongue. But it's a probably 15, 20 page update to the gas pipeline intrusion campaign that really started in 2011. What's notable there, as the name implies, this was focused on gas pipeline industry. There were a range, I don't know the exact number of asset owners that were impacted, but the concern was Chinese-based threat actors were gaining access into these gas companies. They were actively looking for keywords such as SCADA, modem dial-ups, network topographies, network architectures, and they were siphoning that off. And the concern was that they were pre-positioning themselves and they were gaining access to do something at a future date. The challenge was we had no visibility on if they had access into. Well, we knew they had access. We knew they had usernames and passwords that they had already exfilled out. But we don't know if they use those credentials. Why? Because we weren't the asset owners weren't monitoring. They weren't instrumented beyond their corporate environment into these SCADA networks and industrial environments to know if or if not the adversary had gained access into the environment. This is a continual theme that we have over the course of the next couple slides, or presentation, really. This gas pipeline intrusion set from over 10 years ago is very similar to the Volt Typhoon, also known as VOLTZITE threat group that I'll be touching on a little bit ago, that is the current threat that many of you may have been briefed on over the course of the last year and a half or so. During my time at NERC, I also pushing the boundaries. And I gave a talk with Bob Huber at the SCADA Summit in 2012. It's now called the ICS Summit. They changed the names. Where I proposed a lot of the methodology that I used previously from a network security monitoring perspective and extending that into the ESP. I talked about having logs for a year. I got in trouble. And I also got challenged quite a lot on stage that NERC is proposing extending things by a year. It's like, I didn't say NERC was doing any of that. I'm saying if you want to get in front of an attack, you need logs for more than 90 days. And they should be more than antivirus logs or successful logon attempts in order to detect that. So a couple of years later, I left NERC. I fought that fight, and I got, my slide didn't translate well, but that's okay. I moved over to the industry and became a vendor. Like, all right, we'll solve this through other means. So I've been at Dragos now like 8 years. And the premise of Dragos from day one was largely the idea that there are threats out there that focus on industrial control systems, including the bulky electric system. And nobody knows what they are because nobody's looking for them. Nobody has access into these environments to actually know what's going on. Let's expose that. So Dragos over the last 8 years has been focused on doing that. The white text that you can't see on the white background there, these are the threat groups that Dragos has tracked over the last 8 groups. So these are largely state-sponsored, state-sanctioned sort of threat groups that are persistent out there with either the intent or capability to impact industrial control systems at large. These aren't your IT threats. They're not stealing your social security number. They're intent on having a physics impact through computers. We're now tracking 23 of these threat groups. They're actually covered quite extensively in our year in review, which is a publicly available report that you can download off dragos.com. It's my one pitch. It's a 55-page document that details the threats that are out there. I would say that the common themes from this year's threat review, of looking at last year's in review, is a couple-fold. One, the threat groups themselves have gained in complexity from an OT-centric perspective. So we've historically, Electrum was one of the first threat groups that we identified. They were responsible for the crash override attack in Ukraine 2016 that was responsible for disruption of transmission substation in Kiev. Long-time threat group still exists, still doing things in Ukraine, incidentally. But we also have new threat groups like Graphite. What's different this last year is we're seeing a combination of complexities with hacktivist groups. That middle dot there, CAR, the Cyber Army Russia Reborn, positions themselves as a pro-Russian hacktivist group. The complexity here is that these groups are sharing infrastructure, they're sharing data and intelligence, and they have large overlaps with the victimology or the victims that they're targeting. This is new from an ICS perspective, and shows what I would call just the more complex sort of ecosystem of attackers and the volume of attackers that exists. 2 other key trends that aren't on the slide that make in the year in review across all of those threat groups, whether you're the most sophisticated threat group out there, that such as the Electrum, and you've been able to demonstrate capabilities to disrupt the electric grid. It's pretty cool. You have hacktivists that are taking internet accessible devices and defacing them. Yeah, it's okay. And you have ransomware that's doing ransomware attacks that are blurring the lines and often not targeting ICS systems, but they have collateral damage of ICS systems. So they're attacking classic corporate environments and bleeding over into some of the ICS spaces themselves. The commonality between all of those groups They're going after remote access devices, whether it is something less sophisticated like VNC or RDP, like that's not great, or something more sophisticated like enterprise VPN solutions that have access into these environments, whether they're Avanti or Cisco or Palo Alto. They're actively looking for and exploiting those to gain access in industrial environments. So again, not just Electrum, not just the state-sponsored folks, the hacktivist groups, the ransomware groups, they're targeting remote access solutions. One of those threat groups is VOLTZITE, also known as Typhoon. I'm going to assume a lot of knowledge, a lot of information has made its way to y'all on Typhoon. The key components that we've seen, and Dragos has responded to incidents with Typhoon within the electric sector in the United States. So the threat is certainly real. What we've seen from an adversarial perspective is the infrastructure they've supported. They are really built. They have a large attack infrastructure. That attack infrastructure is shared resources with other threat groups in the form of what's called ORB, which is operational relay boxes. So just attack infrastructure. They're sharing them with other attack groups. And then they also have their own, they also have their own infrastructure and their own botnet where they target edge devices. So think routers and gateways and switches that are internet accessible. They're using those devices as their kind of jumping off point. So if they were to focus on on a victim here in Arizona, as an example, they would find infrastructure that they've compromised on those edge dividers that are local geographically based here, and they would launch their attack from that equipment. VOLTZITE continues to demonstrate the exact same concern that first gas pipeline intrusion set from 2011 is concerned about, which is pre-positioning themselves, having the right data to do something at the time and place of their choosing. I didn't, that wasn't just me, right? That is the concern that started with the gas pipeline intrusion set and exists today with VOLTZITE. I can't clicky. The clicky, no worky. Okay, thank you. In addition to some of the threat groups that we tracked, we've also seen a continued change of ICS malware. This is kind of interesting. So Dragos defines ICS malware very specifically. So to Dragos, that means it has three components to it. It has malicious intent. That's easy. It has some sort of capability within the OT segment, some sort of ICS like protocol or knowledge that's being leveraged. But it can also have an impact on the industrial process itself, some sort of disruption attack. Not like I attacked a Windows server and I turned it off. Like, well, what's the effect from a bulky electric system perspective? Nothing. Then it's not ICS malware. If it's yes, something bad happened to the BS, then yes, that's ICS malware in this case. We have two examples of ICS malware in the last year. Both of these are like not sexy sort of ICS malware. We used to have crash override affected a transmission substation. Now we have FluxNet. It affected I think it's 600 apartment buildings in Kiev in the winter time and disabled their cooling or their heating systems during I think it was in January. It used FluxNet used Modbus, which is the most historically relevant ICS sort of protocol that exists. If you ever went through an ICS course, you probably had your labs on Modbus because it's the grandfather of ICS protocols. And yeah, it was used by a hacker persona pro-Russian persona to leverage this attack. Well, what's interesting about FOXNet is it's not very interesting. It's using open source libraries, and it's using Modbus commands in order to have the denial of service attack. What's interesting, it is interesting if you happen to be in one of those apartment buildings. Secondly, we have Frosty Goop. Frosty Goop was identified by Dragos and named by Dragos. So sorry, we called it Frosty Goop. I didn't call it that. It uses a proprietary protocol called MBus, not Modbus, MBus, across metering systems in the metropolitan area of Moscow, and it caused a denial of service attack. It hit those check boxes of what ICS malware is. What I find less interesting with that piece of malware is more of the behaviors and the attack sequences of that. So not only was remote access through exploitation through remote access in order to gain access into the environment, they identified the metering systems. They downgraded the firmware of the metering systems to a previous version, and then they used Frosty Goop to deliver their attack. So one, it's like, oh, Frosty Goop, it's using like a non-sophisticated, it's non-sophisticated malware, but the rise, but it's also a tradecraft of downgrading the firmware, manipulating these devices. Shows the level of sophistication that is not common across these threat groups. And then finally, ransomware. So ransomware, Dragos has started tracking ransomware. So again, we're really only focused on industrial control systems. So ransomware, we've ignored for a long time. We started tracking ransomware about 3 years ago. Year over year, ransomware within industrial organizations has increased 50% year over year, except this last year, it actually increased by 87%. And there's a target of opportunity with ransomware. So ransomware, when it gets, the first ransomware case in electric is a generation, non-regulatory related. It was a peaker plant. Ransomware was delivered. They gained access through, again, remote access solution. For the first 24 hours, they scanned the environment every which way possible, which if you were monitoring for security, you would have identified all of those scans. You had 24 hours to do that in this case before the ransomware was delivered and bricked out the system. Another case, we had ransomware, this wasn't electric, but it was within the industrial environment for over 30 days. They gained access and they sold it on the black market. Hey, anyone want to buy this? Access. Somebody eventually did after 30 days, came in, delivered the ransomware. So we're going back to why. And the keyword I used was incentives. I didn't say enforce it. Like, I wasn't positioning, say, NERC CIP 15 in 2021 when I was talking about the need for detection, logging, and gaining visibility into these environments. What I was talking about, or actually I should slow down, at the onset of NERC CIP 15, Dragos is a vendor. We're focused on solving customer problems. The product team started talking about, okay, well, how do we revise our feature set, right? So we can help customers with NERC CIP 15. And I saw things that didn't make me feel good. Like some of the things we talked about. It was, we'll redefine baselines, we'll do better. We'll up the level of like auditing specific and retention and feel good about where we are, which is good things. But how we started positioning it from a product perspective, okay, just enable baselines and you're good. It's like, that's not the point of NERC CIP 15. The point of NERC CIP 15 is to identify when an adversary is in your environment. And I would argue if you're doing baselines, remote access, I kept trying to say remote access several times through my presentation. If you're compromising your remote access solution, baselines may not detect you. If you're using living off the land techniques of that native capability that's inherent in Windows and some of these systems, going back to the case I had in 2009 was using those sorts of capabilities. You're not likely going to detect that with just pure baselines. If you're seeing tomfoolery with some of the industry-specific protocols like DMP3 or 61850, you may not detect it in baselines. And let me pause there. Dragos can identify that. Don't tell Rob I said Dragos can't do that. We can do that. We have all these other capabilities. But if you're only circling one feature set of like, hey, this is how we do baselines, and this is how we do NERC compliance for NERC 15, you're missing the forest through the trees. Having the threat capability, the threat detections to identify remote access exploitation, living off the land techniques, these all exist in not just Dragos technology, I'm sure others as well. And that's the freedom that we need to both build in from a detection perspective and from a compliance perspective. So foundationally, a couple of the points I would drive home. Foundationally, as we start looking at NERC 15 and what does that look like from a compliance perspective, which by the way, this is my first industry event in the electric sector in a long time. Like, y'all may have this solved. You may have already battled these conversations already, or maybe there's still fresh wounds that we need to talk through. I quite frankly don't know. But if I were to be walking into the discussion, first assumption is assume that you're already compromised. When you think of ESP, you do not think of it as already compromised. Like I did counts across all the sub requirements previously. I think it's 77% of the NERC compliance from 008 to 15 focus on preventative controls. The rest are on detection and response. The whole program is based on you do not get compromised because we have all these controls. I'm saying you have to assume compromise. I'm also saying the adversary is actively evading you. So you can't deploy one tool, have your standard config, wash your hands, say we're good. The adversary over time is going to learn and adapt to what the industry does. And they're going to be faster than you unless you've built in the foundational flexibility for having creativity and flexibility in the monitoring program itself. In some ways, when I read the NERC 15 standards as they fleshed out, because like you're trying to create a compliance regime around a SOC, like that's never been done. It's never been done. I'm not saying SOC lives in this idea of like pure bliss and creativity, and you can't measure it or control it. You can. But you also need extreme flexibility on scenarios that you weren't expecting for and that you may not have thought of or instrumented. You need to be able to turn that around quickly in a non-emergency situation saying, we're doing this other thing just to see what's there. Like that is not a traditional mindset from a compliance perspective. But I think it's the spirit of the standards and what the commission was trying to get to when the focus of NERC 15 is on identifying threats that are in the environment. So with that, let's fix some cyber stuff. Appreciate your time.